Good afternoon, everybody. Thursday, 12:30 here Eastern Time, and it is time to talk about a radical shift that's about to happen with Bitcoin ETFs. Bitcoin ETFs, for all intents and purposes, have been the impetus behind the move from 40K ish to 100K almost ish, a little bit beyond and a little bit underneath. Depending on when we're taking a look at it, we're at 97.8, almost 98 right now. So what's the radical shift that's about to happen associated with Bitcoin ETFs? What's it mean? What's the timing on that particular shift? And then what are the expectations after the shift happens? Before I get to the radical shift itself, I want to make sure that everybody understands my personal hypothesis as it relates to Bitcoin and then crypto overall. Alan, if you can bring up that first slide, it's a pretty good visual imprint associated what my thoughts are associated with crypto, right? So there's Bitcoin, and then for all intents and purposes, there's a bit of everything else. Meme coins at the bottom of that trash heap. Others maybe at the top of that particular heap. But as Michael Saylor has said so many times, there is no second best. So, I put my thoughts out there from a visual standpoint yesterday or the day before, and it seemed to resonate with some folks out there. There is no second best. So that being said, let's put some numbers and some truth to the whole. There is no second best. So here we go. In the first year of existence, Bitcoin ETFs went from, for example, in BlackRock's IBIT product, $0 billion to a total of more than $40 plus billion in assets under management. And all of the other Bitcoin ETFs had similar up and to the right projections that only got to maybe 5 billion when they were first released. But the projections were way too small, way too low. And so we had up and to the right realities associated with assets under management in the Bitcoin ETF space. A reminder that BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF was their most successful launch in the history of their ETF catalog. For all intents and purposes, BlackRock was the first sizable asset manager to issue ETFs. So they are seen, Larry Fink is sort of seen as the godfather of ETFs. Vanguard does more business with ETFs because they're Vanguard, but BlackRock really brought them into the mainstream. So the fact that BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF is their most successful launch ever is truly a remarkable shift in the mindset associated with Bitcoin itself. So that's why you see Larry Fink out there talking about Bitcoin every time he's in the public. It's because his Bitcoin product, was absolutely the most successful product they had last year and the most successful product they've ever launched. So with that as a backdrop, we were waiting for the potential regime change associated with regulatory and legal in the crypto space and specific to Bitcoin ETFs, because there were some sort of easy wins associated with adjustments that were sort of hogtied and set to the side by the previous SEC leadership, Gensler et al. So with that being said, there was an easy switch that could be flipped on or flipped off, however you want to look at it, that could change the cash create mechanism in between the issuers of Bitcoin ETFs and authorized participants. So instead of cash create, where you end up buying Bitcoin on the front end, but if you sell any of your shares in the ETFs, you're settling in cash as opposed to settling in Bitcoin. Well, SAB 121 was rescinded almost a month ago now, which allowed for more than just New York bank Mellon Bank to be a huge custodian for Bitcoin and Ethereum. State Street is going to come on board. Goldman Sachs will come on board. There'll be others that will come on board because of that SAB 121 going away. You're going to see banks rush in almost as a gold rush type of moment to be able to custody Bitcoin and Ethereum to begin with. One of the reasons why this first radical shift is going to happen is instead of cash create, when shares are sold, it's going to be in-kind deliverables as opposed to cash create. That is a major shift, which means that banks and brokerages will now have their hands on behalf of customers, actual Bitcoin instead of quote unquote paper Bitcoin or paper Bitcoin that gets turned from shares into cash. It's now actual Bitcoin that is theoretically going to be moving hands and moving in between the hands of banks and authorized participants and brokerages. That is a really big deal. The workings of how that works and how it goes down and settlement and all that stuff gets really, fairly complicated. So I won't go into that all that much, but just know that a shift from cash create to in-kind is a plus for Bitcoin as an asset, and is a plus for Bitcoin as it relates to both short-term, mid-term, and long-term price action to the upside. There will be more inflows on an aggregate basis, on a percentage basis, that end up going into Bitcoin ETFs with an in-kind mechanism as opposed to a cash create. Frankly, it should make Bitcoin ETFs a little more interesting and palatable to the Bitcoin maxis of the world, because now you're dealing with actual Bitcoin as opposed to cash associated with the selling of shares. It's going to make for an interesting time as the market digests when that shift happens. And again, it will be a radical shift because going from cash to actual Bitcoin that these entities will have their hands on and have to very carefully manage the transactions. It's going to be interesting to see how the market reacts to that shift. Another shift that's coming is we're going to see staking associated with the likes of Ethereum ETFs. So Ethereum ETFs got approved, and the way that they got approved, by the way, was a version. They were going to get rejected, like flat out. They were going to get rejected in June, July of last year, and effectively the courts stepped in, made a couple rulings, and those rulings dramatically shifted the SEC to be forced to approve Ethereum ETFs. Not only was the SEC and its staff not ready for those approvals, but the issuers themselves were not ready for the approvals either. So it was a rush to grab all the paperwork, figure it out, get it all done. A lot of legal hours were spent to make that happen. A lot of billable hours, as they say, and it got taken care of. But in that rush, the opportunity for Ethereum ETFs to include staking in their value proposition was removed. And for all intents and purposes, Ethereum ETF issuers probably made the assumption and then made the bet that there's a better chance than not that we have a new set of decision makers at the SEC 6 to 12 months from now. And so we'll revisit the staking process at that time. There may have been conversations with SEC regulators that were not, diametrically or radically opposed to crypto overall, and were somewhat friendly, but just didn't have the numbers associated with pulling off staking at the time, but were friendly to the industry and friendly to the idea of staking from the get-go. Somebody like Hester Peirce would be someone like that. So conversations probably were had that, listen, if and when there's an adjustment and a shift in the right direction associated with how these things should be handled and what should have happened from the beginning, that shift can actually happen again with some rules and some adjustments to the products themselves. That time has come. So my guess is that you'll see at some point in the next 6 months an adjustment to Ethereum ETFs to include staking as part of their value proposition. So the radical shift for Bitcoin ETFs is in-kind distribution associated with the selling of shares. Radical shift for Ethereum ETFs is staking is on its way. All of these things are coming soon, and they're going to happen in a way that I think will be a plus positive for the industry. Alan, if you could bring up the next slide, and I'll give an explanation of what this next slide is discussing. So this is Matt Siegel from Van Eck, who is an executive at the firm and been really integral and important in the process associated with their particular offerings, both Bitcoin ETF and Ethereum ETF. And the NASDAQ, filing on in terms of IBIT on January 24th for in-kind create versus cash create. That filing was accepted by the SEC, meaning it wasn't approved, but it was accepted, and we're going to start the process, start the shot clock, so to speak, of making that adjustment from a legal and mechanical standpoint. And again, Matt's point is what I made earlier. This shift from cash create to in-kind is not the easiest story for mainstream media and even crypto media to cover, because it's deep in the weeds associated with how issuers and authorized participants work, and the back end of banking also works. But as as it was said here in this tweet, it is a huge deal, and broker dealers will be touching BTC directly. So again, as to the title of this stream, a radical shift for Bitcoin ETFs, there it is in tweet form associated with Matt, that U.S. broker dealers will be touching BTC directly as opposed to the cash create mechanism as it stands right now. Alan, go ahead and pull up the next tweet real quick. So this was as of yesterday, and so the CBOE filed the same to allow in-kind creation and redemption for both their Bitcoin ETF and their Ethereum ETF. They're going to be accepted fairly quickly. And if approved, the in-kind process should make ETFs cheaper and will allow broker dealers to touch Bitcoin. Again, what that means is that it's not just IBIT that's now filed for these adjustments. It's not just the NASDAQ; it's also the CBOE. So the partners that are used by different Bitcoin ETF and Ethereum ETF companies, have now, for all intents and purposes, nearly all of them have filed in some way to make this shift from cash create to in-kind. And the industry doesn't all file to make that adjustment if they haven't had meaningful conversations with staff at the SEC that this is a probable outcome, that the probable outcome is a shift away from cash create and into in-kind. So it would be a surprise, and it would be a significant upset if quicker rather than not in-kind, the in-kind process would be accepted and shifted away from cash create and the redemption process. So all of the Bitcoin Ethereum ETFs are going to shift into that process. And so now you're going to have, again, the issuers themselves, the banking institutions as authorized participants, and then the broker dealers associated with moving clients in and out of these products will all have their hands on the actual crypto asset itself, Bitcoin and Ethereum, when these processes go through. So a huge shift. It's a radical shift for Bitcoin ETFs. Mostly the radical version of it is that, Bitcoin ETFs are a huge asset class at this point, given how long they've been available to the public. We either have gotten to 100 billion in total AUM associated with Bitcoin ETFs, or we're really close to it. I know at the end of the year we were closer to 60 billion than we were to 50. And we've continued to have significant inflows across all the Bitcoin ETFs. And over the past 3 to 6 months, we have had significant inflows into Ethereum ETFs on a percentage basis, considering the way that they started, the way Ethereum ETF started out in terms of flows. They had a real issue with Grayscale product. Grayscale product saw enormous outflows on a percentage basis based on what they started the particular ETF journey with. That hurt Ethereum ETFs for the first, let's call it 4 to 5 months of their existence. But since then, there's been an adjustment, significant flows, and those flows have really accelerated ever since the election in November and the adjusted change from a regulatory standpoint. First, let's call it, 2 months, knowing that the election had been won by Trump and there'd be a real shift from a regulatory standpoint, but also, then the actual inauguration itself, the installing of new staff, the removal of other staff, so that philosophically, the organizations, the regulatory organizations were set up ready to affect change associated with crypto in general. Probably nearly every week, President Trump himself says something about Bitcoin and crypto. Just yesterday, he mentioned again that the idea is for the United States to be the leader in the world with Bitcoin and crypto and AI. So oftentimes they connect, quote unquote, Bitcoin, crypto, and AI all together. Whether good or bad, the fact that it's being talked about, the fact that it's being talked about as being the leader globally, those are all positive things. I know that there's a subsection of the audience that wants to see it be Bitcoin only. I probably would maybe fall into that subsection, given my theories and hypothesis around the space. But at the same time, that's not reality. Reality is there are other crypto assets out there, and from an innovation standpoint, if you're not only a regulator but somebody who's trying to grow the space, and you're in government, you're the crypto czar, you're the SEC chair, or the head of the Department of Commerce or Treasury, all of those things, there's more innovation and growth beyond Bitcoin that probably is going to end up being part of the story overall. For example, Senator Hagerty's stablecoin bill, that's actually beginning to move its way through the process associated with a bill becoming law. In fact, I just saw today, I think, that a Democrat senator signed on to be a co-sponsor of the bill. So those things are going to move through the process, when before they were DOA, dead on arrival, no chance that it's going to happen. So big things happening in the space, and more so than anything else, there's just there's open roads, right? Let's call it 6 months ago, there was a belief, whether it was philosophical or the actual reality on the ground, that should the Biden administration win another election and continue, or Kamala Harris win and continue, that there was only going to be a 2-lane highway. It was going to be Bitcoin and Ethereum. And for all intents and purposes, all that was legally approved at that time was Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum ETFs. That there was a set of circumstances when it came to how the SEC was carrying out their legal thesis, and Wells notices and court appearances, where everything that wasn't Bitcoin and Ethereum was effectively outlawed. That shifted radically, and now instead of a 2-lane highway, whether good or bad, we have a 10 to 12 lane highway, and we'll see how it all shakes out. Another point to be made is that yesterday, or actually this morning, days are actually long here in crypto land. Earlier this morning, there was an announcement that the SEC had created a working group, or some sort of group that is going to be focused on enforcement, and that enforcement is going to be, for all intents and purposes, solely focused on fraud associated with digital assets, which is the way it should be. There is a problem associated with folks coming in and seeing too much open space in the crypto world. All you have to do is look, a couple inches to your right or a couple inches to your left in the world of crypto, and particularly meme coins over the past week or two or three or four or six. And there's an unending version of problematic processes associated with meme coins, rug pulls, and the like that I don't have to get into because we're all aware of them. That needs to be tightened up, and there needs to be some regulatory clarity around it. That needs to be adjusted back to the mean, as opposed to running rampant. Now, the truth of the matter is this particular road, the meme coin road, was because of a lack of involvement from the SEC. They were going after projects that were attempting to play within the rules. Meme coins were ignored, and so by default, the process of meme coin existence, of meme coin creation, kind of became a default okay thing to do. And when you create a vacuum, that vacuum finds a lot of participants, and there's a portion of those participants that are not good actors and are actually committing real fraud. The SEC created a task force that was announced earlier this morning, where they're going to go about creating some rules and some actual guardrails associated with the space, focused on fraud, not focused on this is or is not a security. That conversation is not of interest to the SEC right now. That will have to be settled as it relates to as a congressional matter and a matter associated with actual laws being passed. But when it comes to fraud, that's the main focus of what the SEC should be doing, and that's what that task force has plans to do. Additional news associated with this week has been just there's this vibe in the crypto space that fear and greed index continues to edge more towards fear than greed, while we're sitting at Bitcoin 98,000. What a world, right? I've been around since 2015, 16. So I went through the 17 cycle where the holidays of 2017, Christmas / Thanksgiving, Bitcoin went on a run, and for all intents and purposes in 2017 went from in the 1,000s all the way up to 20,000. So I went through that cycle. In 2018, a very vicious bear market, down 80+%, from 20K down to 21K down to the 3,000s. And then another move higher. That move higher took us significantly higher. And then 21, 22, we saw new highs. And then we saw, another very vicious bull market. And again, that vicious bull market was associated with, oh, by the way, actual fraud, FTX fraud, Celsius fraud, and other scalable operations associated with fraud. Hedge fund that got blown up, and Luna that got blown up. Those were cascading frauds that developed and ended up falling on each other that created an avalanche. And again, you saw Bitcoin go from, let's call it 69 down to at one point 13K. Difficult bear market. But as Bitcoin does, it's unkillable. And so it began to rise and rise and rise. And then we found ourselves in the middle of 23 to, be at the 23 to 28 level. And then we have some movement on the Bitcoin ETF front. And that began to put some jet fuel underneath Bitcoin that was coupled with the halving and the halving happening. And between those two elements, has taken us to where we are right now. The foundational architecture associated with Bitcoin right now are the flows associated with Bitcoin ETFs, the flows associated with Ethereum ETFs, and then the understanding that there are more crypto ETFs that are going to come to market, whether it's Solana, whether it's XRP, whether it's Doge, whether it's an amalgamation of all of those put together. That there will be ETFs that will be baskets of the industry itself. Those will get approved. So not only do you have the likes of the BlackRocks, the Bitwises, the VanEck of the world that are constantly having institutional and retail client money get shoveled into their products, which forces them to go out to the market and purchase Bitcoin and Ethereum at this point. That same thing will happen with other crypto assets. And we'll see where it goes. We'll see where the demand actually begins to wane, because the demand hasn't even peaked with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Where will the demand, quote unquote, peak associated with crypto overall as an industry? And will regulatory rulemaking, congressional lawmaking and adjustments, will it keep up with the pace of growth on the institutional side and the banking side related to crypto? Because that's going to move very, very fast as well. Just in the past, I'm gonna attempt to pull up a tweet that I put out maybe, I don't know, a month ago. So bear with me as I scroll through here. Yeah, I'm not going to use that one, but I'll come back to that one. What has happened in terms of a shift, not only a regulatory shift, a vibe shift, an institutional shift, a huge market shift associated with Bitcoin, and then just crypto overall. It's happened so fast. Here's the one I want to use. Alan, I'll put it in the chat, and then you grab it and put it up there. Just in the past 90 days, right? So in the past 90 days takes us back to a little bit before the election. Goldman Sachs is, sending out weekend research work to their biggest institutional clients. And those biggest institutional clients are being encouraged that Goldman is more than happy to execute as exotic as can exist right now, opportunities on Bitcoin, swaps, options. The swaps that I'm talking about are the difference between spot Bitcoin ETFs or spot Bitcoin itself and Bitcoin futures. So to execute some arbitrage there. Options are just options plays, again, associated with spot, because Bitcoin options now exist. And those were approved very, very quickly, just before the election actually happened. We now have Bank of New York Mellon, and then coming on board in the next couple of months, State Street and Citigroup will custody Bitcoin and Ethereum. Actually custody the assets themselves, not paper versions or ETFs or whatever. They're going to custody them in kind, so that they can facilitate that in-kind process, which again is the radical shift that I'm talking about here today. Abu Dhabi, their sovereign wealth fund, adds a huge amount of Bitcoin ETF exposure with BlackRock's IBIT. Larry Fink in Davos last month. I cannot stress this enough, folks. Larry Fink, I have researched this. I can't find another spot, another place, anywhere where Larry Fink has come out and made a price prediction on an asset that BlackRock is meaningful involved with. I can't find it. There may have been moments where he's talked about on a percentage basis, or that they like the asset, or they appreciate the asset class, or he's talking about an asset class in the aggregate. But to speak directly to Bitcoin and a price, whether or not it was a prediction, but it was a price, it came out of his mouth. Okay. So he said, he sees a world where Bitcoin's 500, 600, 700,000. So Larry Fink is talking about Bitcoin at 5 to 7x where it is now. That is remarkable. SAB 121 was rescinded. Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Bill introduced by Senator Loomis, and all the conversation and histrionics around that. And these are just a few things that have happened over the last 90 days. Remember, Ross Ulbricht was freed, and a promise made, promise kept by President Trump. We now have a crypto czar in David Sachs. We have several crypto working groups in government that are trying to find the best way to integrate and elevate crypto here in the United States, as opposed to shutting down banking access, Operation Choke Point 2.0. So there are two tracks of elevating crypto as it stands right now. One track is, let's give access, let's do more approvals, let's be a welcoming government as opposed to a government attempting to shut it down. Then on the other side, the other track is, let's find out why and what were the reasons behind Operation Choke Point 2.0, and let's shine a light from a transparency standpoint on who did that, why did they do it, and let's make sure that never happens again. Let's out the people that did it, make sure that they're fired, and make sure that the agencies never pick and choose winners ever again. It can't happen. So you've got elevation here as it relates to innovation, and then elevation here in terms of access and government moving obstacles away so that people and industries and companies can actually thrive. Just yesterday, we had Fold listed, I believe, on the NASDAQ as an IPO. And Fold is a Bitcoin-only company, and their IPO went exceptionally well. So you're going to see innovation be elevated. When innovation is elevated, then the opportunities for investors to make money on that innovation that's elevated increases. So you're going to see innovation elevated, companies be created, those companies be elevated, companies be integrated, assets be integrated into the greater banking system at large, and then those companies end up going public and create additional wealth beyond just the quote unquote commodity or asset associated with crypto, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum, and then on down the line. By the way, it was also announced, maybe 2-3 months ago, that BlackRock had created an internal fund called Build, where they're working with, I believe, Aptos, Chainlink, Polygon. Chainlink may not be in there, don't quote me, but Aptos, Polygon, and a few others, at Avalanche as well, as blockchain type of opportunities to create and build the tokenization of real world assets. So again, innovation led by the world's largest institutional wealth manager. BlackRock manages something like $11.5 trillion in assets. They're the biggest asset manager in the world. So when they're taking that stuff on, when Goldman is telling clients, hey, we want to help you do additional things with Bitcoin beyond just holding spot Bitcoin, and we're happy to do that for you. when rules are being shifted and adjusted so that they're not arbitrary and capricious, when litigation is being stopped in its tracks and removed and effectively dismissed within the courts to remove, again, more obstacles to innovation. We're in a moment, we're in a time where when we see those shifts and adjustments then trickle down and make meaningful impact on something like Bitcoin ETFs, which have become again a massive asset class associated with the ETF space and traditional Wall Street, it matters. It really does matter. So huge shifts that have happened and will continue to happen. I've got one more point to make that I think is worth looking at. Give me a moment here. Okay. Here we are. I'll put this in the chat real quick. By the way, the fact that Bitcoin's price has held up the way that it has, we're sitting currently, let's just call it, 10 to 11% away from its all-time high versus the way that previous cycles have played themselves out, the way that it's held up in the face of, quick and fast governmental movement that makes shifts and shakes and all those things associated with markets. It's remarkable that Bitcoin has stayed relatively stable. It's dipped down to 89K, sitting at 98K right now. It is meaningful that Bitcoin has remained very stable, has not come anywhere close to previous cycle dips. Certainly not 22, certainly not 2018 when those dips were 60 to 80+%. It is something to see Bitcoin have the opportunity, as Larry Fink said, to be 5 to 7x from here and probably more than that, based on what some of us believe. But at the same time, the potential downside to Bitcoin is mitigated because it is now included as a meaningful asset in the traditional world. And because of its involvement in the traditional world, it's much less available for any sort of manipulation. You could make the claim that 2015, 17, 18, even through 21, that there were entities, the Binances, the FTXs of the world, that could pull off some level of manipulation associated with Bitcoin price. That no longer exists in a meaningful way because the entities associated with it at scale, the Bitcoin ETF companies, the BlackRocks of the world, the Bitwises of the world, the Fidelities of the world, the VanEcks of the world, these are massive companies. BlackRock with 11 trillion in assets under management, Fidelity, whatever their number is, massive company. VanEck is known as an absolute behemoth in the ETF world. They were the first to come out with a gold ETF, and their gold ETF was one of the ones that fueled the movement of gold price over a period of the next 5 to 7 years once gold was introduced to the ETF world. So those entities now are effectively part of the process by which Bitcoin is a meaningful institutional asset, when 2 to 3 years ago it was seen as not that because of the bad actors in the space. So really a shift, and the shift associated with price is really something to watch. It really is. So the sentiment, and it's something that I've seen talked about on crypto Twitter. I'm going to try and pull it up here real quick. The sentiment associated with Bitcoin and crypto in the traditional financial world, the institutional financial world, that fear and greed in index is completely flipped, right? So institutions are really, really positive about the space, really, really positive about Bitcoin in particular, really, really positive about getting their hands on a new asset that seems to be exciting. And there's all kinds of opportunities available to them as it relates to product building, right? Whereas from a retail standpoint, and very specific to crypto Twitter, that there is, there's negativity associated with it. That the fear and greed index is on the other side with fear, very closely associated by, connected to the meme coin world. So that being said, I'll pull up something here, and let's see what the CEO of Bitwise has to say about sentiment, because it's important. When you have sentiment shifted so significantly with the deepest pockets in the industry, that's why we have a floor associated with Bitcoin's price right now, because the institutional folks have the ability to really keep price at an elevated level, as opposed to price being in a position where it has the possibility and the opportunity to dump the way that it did in 2018 and 2022. I can't find the tweet. I'll find it here somewhere. Well, another point of emphasis is, JP Morgan puts out a quarterly guide to ETFs, and a big portion of that quarterly guide that they just put out, about nearly a week ago, had to do with Bitcoin ETFs, because you simply can't ignore the truth of the scale of what happened last year. There has not been an asset class that's launched in the past 40 years that has had the uptake in assets under management move into the space so quickly, associated with ETFs. It just has not happened, and so you can't ignore it. I mean, you just absolutely cannot ignore it. Radical shift for Bitcoin ETFs. That radical shift is in-kind create and redemption process versus cash create and redemption. There's also going to be a big shift as it relates to Ethereum ETFs, as they're potentially going to add the opportunity for staking inside of those products. It's my belief that just based on the way that the mechanisms work, that the in-kind adjustment for Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs will happen sooner rather than later, and the staking part of the process associated with Ethereum ETFs may take a bit longer, but they will both get here, which will make a material difference in the value proposition associated with both products on a go-forward basis. So thanks for listening, staying on the stream today. Tillman will be back next week. And we'll go toe to toe on some stuff. He's traveling today. He was in Canada with one of his sons, a big hockey tournament, and went really well for them. So good for them. And hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and more specifically, a great weekend. So see you later from Aspen Woods.